on this occasion, as we're trying to negotiate, if you like, navigate our way to a better understanding of the world around us, and as those of us who are interested, especially in the project of peace, the project of coexisting on a planet where there are many people, many different political interests, ideologies of a range of national and cultural foci, all of which potentially are competing with each other and which really should be able to coexist. The best way and the most effective way forward, of course, for us is to think about how we can know more about what happens in other parts of the world. For us in the United States, this sometimes appears to be a bit of a challenge, and this is part of the reason why the focus in these events, and this one in particular, is at least to educate us about what's happening in other parts of the world, about the values that drive other countries, the deep historical ideas that are grounded in the culture of other countries that are different to the United States and indeed to the West. But for us in the United States especially, it's worth keeping in mind that we are really quite a new country compared to the country we're talking about tonight, and that is China. The point of our conversation tonight is to think about Chinese philosophy and to gain an understanding of that. And in thinking about the design of this webinar, I looked at a book by Yak Hui, and it has a timeline of thinkers and from both the East and the West. And certainly it was impressive to see that the very long prehistory of Chinese philosophy stretches back, well, a couple of thousand years, as far as we can tell, before the time that we start to measure history in the West. The Shang dynasty, for example, was around from 1766 to 1122, before the current era. And then the Zhao dynasty, which included Confucius, lasted from 1122 to 256 before the current era. And Confucius, perhaps the best known and the person whose name appeared on the title of this webinar, was doing his work from 551 to 479. We'll hear a lot more about this and the not necessarily the dates, but the long trajectory of the refinement of Chinese history and then the influence of Chinese history on Chinese history by Chinese philosophy. Those of you who read the blurb will also know that I referred to a very impressive and excellent book, this one, Changing Referents, and it takes into account the significant challenges that face us in the West, and certainly not so much everybody in the East or the global South, but us in the West are faced with the challenge of how to recognize and acknowledge the great traditions that stem from China, and to come to terms with not only the difference in culture, but the difference in orientation. Just think for a minute about the deep meanings that are associated with the long history of Christianity and before that Judaism, and how persuasive and pervasive they are in our culture. And compare that with the completely different orientation in the East, in particular in China. Think also about the very significant differences between the idea of the individual and the idea of the group or the collective. Two very different orientations that are grounded to a large extent in philosophical undertakings and thinkings about the value of people, whether they are either privileged as single individual agents or as people within the community in which they live. Now, that's enough for me because my knowledge of this subject is actually quite limited. So I'm extremely delighted to welcome tonight our guest speaker, Elaine or Hanyue Zhang, or Hanyue, sorry, Elaine. I know Elaine and have known Elaine for quite a few years. And she is a classic Chinese philosophy scholar. She's educated in both China and the United States. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism and strategic communication from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in human development and psychology from Harvard Graduate School of Education. From 2014 to 2024, Elaine has been studying Confucianism and Daoism classics on a daily basis. Her online courses on the Confucian classics, The Great Learning, or Dazhu, and the Doctrine of the Mean, Zongyong, has attracted 300,000 students in China. We should keep in mind that the dimensions of our countries are very different. And the dimensions of our countries are represented in those numbers. Elaine, that is an awful lot of people that you have given instruction to over a short number of years. We're delighted to have you here with us tonight. And before you start, I'll just quickly outline how we're going to do this. Elaine will talk using her PowerPoints for around 20 minutes, a little longer. We'll talk then for 10 minutes and think about the essence of peace in its relationship to Chinese philosophy. And we'll think more about concepts of peace and look at some of the literature related to that. The goal towards peace will take a few minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. So, and then I will sum up. So without further ado, I will say welcome to Elaine, and I'll hand over to you, and you're going to present us with some PowerPoint slides, and we look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone, and greetings from Beijing. Thank you so much, Dr. Breen, for inviting me to this talk. It's a very timely topic, and I believe and I look forward to a very fruitful conversation with everyone in the audience. So actually, when we speak of a short-term memory, I think many people associated it with a goldfish. There is a common myth that a certain type of goldfish may only have seconds of memory. So for them, the fish tank is like the ocean. However, it is actually us humans that are subjected to this phenomena. For example, our collective memory actually typically span within but only 100 years. Even things that happened several decades ago can get fuzzy in our recollection. And throughout the vast expanse of the human history, modern civilization, a couple 100 years from now, merely constitute a small fraction relative to the entirety of the human history. This presence is fleeting. So actually we say, although times are always changing, human nature remains. So many of the harsh challenges that humanities face today, such as the quest for peace, in fact, have been answered or addressed by sages from thousands of years ago. Here's my slide. Hopefully you guys can see it all right. Okay. Actually, as I prepare for this talk, I found this newspaper clip actually from Marcus' hometown, Australia. It's from the Caribbean. It's from the Canberra Times, 1988, when a group of actually 75 Nobel laureates they asserted at an international conference on the future of humanity in the 21st century. And they said that if human beings were to survive or live in peace and prosperity in the 21st century, we must go back to Confucius and seek his wisdom from 25 centuries ago. So look into history and we may find wisdom. Actually, if we look back into history, it is widely acknowledged in world history that China was in fact one of the largest and wealthiest economies for many periods in ancient times, with its economic activities primarily focused on agriculture, handicrafts, and trade. So here's just a list that shows the GDP GDP representation in the world throughout the Asian dynasties, and it's done by British scholar Angus Maddison in his book, The World Economy, A Millennial Perspective. So we could see that in ever since 206 BC to like the 1920s, China's GDP was consistently the largest in the world. The reason why China, in our history could enjoy, such long period of time of prosperity was actually because of its time-honored culture. In fact, traditional Chinese culture has traversed over 5,000 years. It's kind of like a river flowing from time immemorial through present without ever stopping in this cause. And throughout the ages, Chinese sages have taken it as their life purpose to explore the truth of the universe and life and develop inner treasures. So here in today's talk, I'm gonna break down into 3 segments. First of all, we're gonna talk about the essence of peace, and then a few representative thoughts on peace from Confucian school and Daoism, and finally, the way of peace from the lenses of Chinese philosophy. Well, when we talk about the essence of peace, I think everybody, would have heard of this golden rule, right? It's from Confucius and also from many other philosophers: do not do unto others what you would not want to do to yourself. But today I would like everybody to pause a second and think, why? Why is that? Is it just because it's the morally right thing to do? Why we should not do unto others what you would not want to do to yourself? In fact, there's a deeper meaning to the obvious meaning on the surface, because in fact, Chinese philosophy is not only about doing good, but doing what is right. Because and there's also another phrase in Chinese that's called 好人好自己,坏人坏自己, or actually good deeds benefit oneself, bad deeds harm oneself. So what you do unto others are what actually you do unto yourself. This is actually very easy to think about. Like, for example, if ever we feel like envious towards another person, like who's the one to suffer? It's ourselves, right? We feel uncomfortable inside. We feel this burning sense of envy or another feeling. So eventually, especially the thought and intent that arise from within us, these are the true actions that are done. So in other words, we could quote Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction to oneself. Can also be metaphorically applied to social dynamics and human interactions. So the reason why I mentioned this is to introduce you to this beautiful quote by Master Wang Yangming. He is regarded as a sage in Chinese history and also a great philosopher, educator himself. I would invite everyone to read this quote because I don't think it needs any further explanation. So Master Yangming says, "The great man regards heaven, earth, and myriad things as one body. He regards the world as one family and the country as one person. As to those who make a cleavage between objects and distinguish between self and others, they are small men. That the great man can regard heaven, earth, and myriad things as one body is not because he deliberately wants to do so, but because it is natural to the human nature of his mind that he do so." It is also worth mentioning that Master Yangming himself is also a great military general. He's very famous in Chinese history because he had never lost a single battle. And at one time, he famously just wrote a letter to a group of rebels, and which ended a war, a battle that lasted for years, for like the officials before him. And his secret is because he was able to awaken the innate knowing or the greater self within the rebels. So as we can see, ultimately, Chinese philosophy believes all beings in the universe are one entity. So if I harm another person, that is the same as harming myself. So why bother doing that? And actually, we could experience this one entity at this very moment right now. So this is a picture taken at Genza, a young boy who we don't know his name, we don't know his parents, but every time I look at this picture as I prepare for this talk, my heart just aches. It's so sad, and I believe all people in the world could feel this sadness, especially those who are parents, mothers and fathers who saw this picture. They feel worried, they feel pain, as if this boy were their own child. So why is that? This actually reflects the amazing ability about our heart mind, where we can sense empathy and compassion towards another being. But through the lenses of Chinese philosophy, we say it's because we are essentially one being. So that's why we can connect our emotions, our innermost feelings connect. So actually, the Chinese perception of the essence of peace is deeply rooted in how we view life. And the key word here is actually self-transcendence. So Chinese philosophy inspires individuals to surpass the illusion of the individual self or the small self, and to attain the state of the greater self. So it's just like how if we look at our hands, the fingers are illusion as individual beings, but the hand itself is the greater self. So it's not that you forget or eliminate the little self that was you, the small self, but actually the greater self is us. So that's why we advocate for peace throughout history, and we don't think that there's any winners in any wars. And then we go to some some representative thoughts on peace. So first, let's take a look at Confucian school of thought on peace. I especially picked a few very interesting ones. For example, this sentence is actually deliberately translated into 3 words, because in Chinese, they are composed 3 words at a time. Man on earth, good at birth, the same virtue, the same nature varies on nurture. So this is called the 3-character classic from Ming Dynasty, AD 1200, around that period of time. So this book was actually used as children's education. So everyone, including kids in my age, like the millennials, they would know the such quotes and sentences, because according to Confucian school, all men at birth are good in nature. And the reason why some of them grew to become bad people is because of bad nurture. And also this sentence right here is always so inspiring. It's by a Chinese philosopher in the Song Dynasty. He said, to embody the will of heaven and earth, to reveal life's purpose for the people, to carry on the lost teachings for past sages, and to create peace for generations to come. So actually, this is kind of regarded as the mission statement to Confucian scholars. The only reason why they pursue knowledge, they pursue self-cultivation, is to create peace, not only for this generation, but for generations to come. So Chinese scholars, centuries after centuries, they've been taught and educated by teachings like these. Also, even more ancient Confucian classic, regarded as one of the most famous classic in Confucian school, is 大学, the Great Learning. The Great Learning essentially is about how to turn yourself into a truly great person. So the first line goes here: the Tao of the Great Learning lies in manifesting the clear character within, in loving the people and in attaining the ultimate goodness. So again, here are 3 goals right here. The first one is to be able to manifest our clear character, to become a good person. And then the second is to love people around. And finally, to attain the ultimate goodness. So as we can see, whether it's from classics like thousands of years ago or a little bit closer to us right now, the main idea, they never change. And let's take a look at Lao Tzu. Sometimes people who are new to Chinese philosophy may think, oh, Lao Tzu and Confucius, they are different schools. However, they really share similar core ideas at the core. So Lao Tzu is regarded as actually a teacher to Confucius. His thoughts on war and peace are mainly in 2 chapters of the Tao Te Ching. The first one is chapter 30. We could read together, those who rely on Tao for governing men do not assert their mastery by the forces of arms, for such a course shall easily produce counter results. And what if war does happen? Lao Tzu says, wherever the military is, weeds and thorns shall rise. After a major military operation, there will certainly be ominous years to come. And here goes chapter 31. Weaponry is the instrument of bad omen. People despise it, and therefore masters of Tao never employ it. The slaying of multitudes should be mourned with sorrow and grief, and victory should be treated with rites of mourning. So, here we can get a glimpse of how Lao Tzu view war and peace. And finally, due to time constraint, we just have to quickly go through each of these slides. But what is the way to peace ultimately through the lenses of Chinese philosophy? The key word here is actually xin, or heart-mind. So if we say Chinese philosophy can be reduced to only one character, is this one right here, xin, the heart-mind. So heart-mind dictates the body. Why is heart-mind not the heart? Because in Chinese, the word xin does not mean the heart that's within our chest. It's actually what that dictates the body. So my xin and Dr. Breen's xin is actually the same, but although we have different hearts. So we say that the heart-mind contains infinite treasures. The heart-mind is also the same as the greater self that we all possess. However, although all human beings possess this great heart-mind, we still do things that are not so great. It's because of 2 primary reasons. The first one is our ignorance, and the second is the greed. These are the 2 primary reasons that obscure and hinder us developing our innate treasures. So if we take a closer look at this, Master Yangming has beautifully put it. Xin, or heart-mind, is as profound as the heavens and the abyss. How do we see this? 心如天渊. It can reach as high as the sky, but can get as low as the abyss. So there are at least 10 levels of the xin. So we start actually from the -1, xin of the mediocre, indulging in laziness and mediocrity, xin of the villain, harboring resentment, jealousy, hypocrisy, xin of the malicious, despicable behaviors, prey on the weak, xin of the wicked, filled with cunning and treachery, xin of the sinful, acting without restraint, committing all manners of evil deeds. So it's fair to say that all unpeaceful conduct are done by xin of these lower levels. And if we look up, we see also xin of the upper levels, from the dutiful, down-to-earth, faithful to responsibilities, to the capable, possessing both virtue and talent, to the worthy, virtuous, and ultimately the sagely, who successfully transcend themselves from the little self to the greater self, and selflessly love all beings. So once we know, we get to know more about the mystery of the heart-mind, we would realize where the way of peace lie. To quote Tao Te Ching again, Lao Tzu says, actions should be taken before any issue develops, and good governance should occur before any chaos begins. We all know that, we should do whatever we can to prevent wars from happening, to prevent bad issues. However, our takeaway is that instead of managing issues, the focus should be on education. which is essentially to help people cultivate their own heart mind, to eliminate the ignorance and greed from within, is the fundamental to peace, fundamental way to peace. I remember there's one occasion when a college student said that she wants to be this protector of animals, that she loves animals so much that she doesn't want them to be harmed. But then we asked this college student, who is harming the animals? And the answer is humans, right? So all the evil deeds stem from people's heart mind. If there's a way that we could cultivate ourselves for us to realize that with every action done, there is a reaction, not only to the other person, but directly to ourselves, people will be more likely to restrain their conduct and to follow the direction of the Tao. So I wrote down the conclusions in these last few slides, and we could share together what Chinese philosophy teach us about peace and the way of peace. So people may differ in nationality, geography, race, ethnicity, or period in which they live. However, their shame remain the same, and they all share boundless treasures within, and they follow the law of action-reaction. If an individual firmly believes in the boundless treasures within their heart mind, they will always pursue their dreams, strive for self-improvement, and exude confidence and strength in life. Therefore, similarly, if a nation believes in their boundless treasures within, they can become truly confident just being themselves and not to harm other countries. So their confidence does not build upon damaging another country. They will use their collective heart mind to forge ahead and endeavor to build a brighter future. And for those who deeply understand the law of action and reaction, they will actively avoid behaviors that harm themselves, others, and society. They will seek instead to benefit both themselves and society, ultimately integrating their personal development into the progress of the country, nation, and humanity as a whole. And similarly, nations that adhere to this principle will also reject behaviors rooted in hegemony, jungle rules, or zero-sum games. Instead, they will prioritize the common development of mankind and act based on the interests not only of their own, but of other countries, working together to build and share a beautiful home on earth. So finally, here are the 4 main takeaways that we learn from Chinese philosophy that can promote peace, both internally and also in the outer world. The first is that the vital secret of life is that the heart mind contains infinite treasures. And the fundamental truth of life is the law of action and reaction. Third, the foremost strategy of life is to build one's own inner character, so we could realize and understand the deeper truth and meaning of life and don't do things that harm ourselves or others. And finally, the greatest value of life is to enable others to build their inner character. So that's all for my talk today, Marcus.
Thank you, Elaine. Well, what a remarkable range of views and perspectives, some of which I've heard before, but they are always incredibly refreshing to hear and to see as part of our learning about a very different approach to things. I was particularly taken, and I suppose this is just a little bit potentially silly of me, but I was particularly taken by the Lao Tzu's comment, which is, whenever the military is, weeds and thorns shall rise. I think there's a number of people in the peace movement who are particularly concerned about the weeds and the thorns rising in our national culture, and the pointlessness of that compared with the potential to develop remarkable sets of different orientations to our attitude towards each other and to ourselves. I'm wondering if there's anything that we can add in terms of taking the Jin notion and seeing how that might apply to us outside of China. How could we, if you like, think about that as people who are embedded in a very different culture and very different societies? Have you got any suggestions about how we might think about that kind of principle, which I know that heart-mind principle is central to not only your own work, but to teaching generally?
Marcus, actually, this brings my memory back to 14 years ago. You remember that was the first time I came to the US. I actually came to know Marcus about 14 years ago, very long time. But I remember actually the first night I spent in the US was with a very nice young lady in Wisconsin. Her daughter at that time was only 4 years old. And actually, the reason why they chose to be a host family for me for a week was that the mother wants to set a great example for her daughter, because they've just recently lost their father, the husband to the young lady. That was 14 years ago. So they hosted me with such great care, like many other host family did to international students. And it was actually moments like that that made me truly believe that human nature do connect. Like, although we may differ from ethnicity, from race, from other aspects of life, but ultimately we share similar feelings towards each other. So these are the applications of the heart mind. And it's also like when we talk about human experience, that like although we may come from different countries, but when we talk about parenting, we talk about children, we share similar feelings. So I think that is one way to get the conversation going, is instead of trying to find, oh, we look different, we talk different language, we find what we have in common. And then ultimately we find, oh, what we have in common is at the core, is where the heart mind lies. So Marcus, yeah.
Thank you, Elaine. And I noticed in the chat there a comment from Jeffrey, and thank you, Jeffrey. We're not going to be so concerned about taking any bets on this, as you suggest, but the point is that there is a significant break between what people who advocate for war and what people who advocate for peace do and think. And it really does, this approach that you've suggested, this is a peace advocacy as central to the way of understanding both the heart-mind attitude, but also the idea that there's only one way in which one can advance within a nation and within a society, and that is through this sort of effort to realize the Jin, really does undermine potentially the entire idea that, well, somebody else will tell you how to behave, and that behavior will often be violence and involve warfare. What would you suggest about how addressing this kind of contradiction or challenge between a very peaceful orientation and one that we're more familiar with in our culture?
Marcus, I think I'd also like to invite the audience maybe to also join the conversation.
Sure.
I think ultimately, to me, because I've also been a student of Chinese philosophy for the past 10 years, even though I was a Chinese myself, before, like 10 years ago, I didn't have such a keen understanding of many of the concepts. They were just written in books. But it was during the past 10 years where I began to not only read more Chinese classics, especially Daoism, Confucianism, but also I engaged in practice, many people are familiar with, like, called self-reflection. So the deeper as I reflect upon myself, the deeper I can see just kind of more clear on the greater self. Now, there's a greater self behind every a small self. So like sometimes even if we do things that are selfish, but actually ultimately we have a reason behind it that we want to do more good. So so actually that's I think the amazing part about Oriental philosophy is it's always hopeful. It's always hopeful when it talks about the human nature, although people may think it can be evil, but we think it's mostly because of nurture. But in human nature that we, since we started as one, and the way to go back to peace is we return to our nature of this oneness. Marcus?
Can I just ask one more question? And more than happy to have questions and comments from participants as well. The idea of the comment that you made that the core ideas do not change. I recognise that that's central to most cultures. There's a core that doesn't change, but surely the conditions in which most Chinese people live now is very materially improved from what it was 75, 80, before the revolution, or even 40 years ago. The end of extreme poverty, for example, those sorts of things. How does the philosophy, even though you've suggested the core ideas don't change, how do you adjust, or how do you see it adjusting to different circumstances and situations?
Well, I think that's a great question. I can only speak of my own experience because actually you could see in many works on Chinese philosophy that points out this very important perspective that philosophy is never about the written words. It's about one's experience and one's own internalization of those if we can talk for days on what Lao Tzu said and what Confucius says, but the main thing is how it is when we truly experience it in our daily life. Like say for example, we could do a random act of kindness every day. And we try to make it different. We try to do a random act of kindness differently every day, and we feel how our heart mind changes, our feelings change, and we could try to say fewer things that are not true to our heart. Like for example, the famous professor, Dr. I think his name is Pute, Dr. Michael Pute of Harvard. He teach a Chinese philosophy course at Harvard. And I remember a student said that his biggest takeaway is that every time someone asks him, how are you doing? I'm not just going to say, oh, I'm doing fine, because it's a lie. I'm going to pause for a second, am I really doing fine? And then say what's honest to the heart, or say something that's different than just, okay, I'm doing fine. Because as we begin to practice these teachings, we feel it differently. So I think I would encourage everyone to experience what Chinese philosophy has to taught and testify it yourself to see how it whether it really make our life better. So.
If anybody has a question or comment, feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you, or we can look at the chat as well. I certainly want to think about this idea of inner treasures and the idea of what inner treasures actually mean. It's not a material thing, is it? But I don't think spirituality either gets to it either.
I think the treasures, we could understand it as the limited potential, as the unlimited potential that we all have. So sometimes we think that there are only certain people who are talented who get these potential, but Chinese philosophy is fundamentally equal, has an equal view on life, because we think everyone has this invisible but unlimited treasures, and peace. And love for each other, these are the treasures that although you can't see, but they do exist, and we can, through cultivating ourselves, gradually develop more of these collective treasures. Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. So that seems to me to be significant, the notion of collective treasures. So there's something that everybody brings, not just, the great individual hero who suddenly emerges, as it were. Jeffrey, do you have a question for us?
Yeah. Well, Well, I had two. Well, I have two, but I'm probably gonna only say one. Is that
Yes,
right?
just one. Yes, thank you.
Okay. First, one of them is in the comments section and underneath the reply comment. But here's the actual question I want to ask. Why hasn't Xi Jinping, that did I pronounce his name right? Xi
Close.
Jinping ordered to have both the Chinese Communist Party and the entire country of China officially the People's Republic of China embrace Daoism, and Daoism is what this meeting is about, right?
Sure. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
That why haven't they fully embraced it? Because that could really be helpful in this time of need.
Well, if I can just say, you might be surprised at the answer, but I've got a good idea what it's going to be. Elaine.
Yeah, Marcus, would you want to answer first? I think you are the expert on this.
I'm not sure I'm the expert, but given my interest in political theory and in some visits I've made to China as well, there has been a significant connection between Taoism, but also the traditions of Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, certainly since 2018 when President Xi took over, but before that as well. But certainly it's been the idea that Confucianism and Chinese philosophy is central to an appreciation of what China is, means that what the party has done is to say, let's make a conscious effort to bring everybody, as it were, into the Xi, into this sort of position, into the possibility of realizing the inner treasures of everybody. And well, it wouldn't be fair to say it's a state and anything like a state religion. It's a culture, it's a way of life, it's an orientation towards each other and towards nature and towards what President Xi now refers to, I think, as beautiful China. The idea that at a certain point, and it was about about early 2010s, I suppose, when China was on a tear materially, doing extremely well, it became clear that material success alone was not going to be good enough. It's the old, like the old story. You might have several Maserati cars if you're extremely wealthy, but you can only drive one at a time. You can only have a certain level of wealth. And there are other important characteristics about being human, about the human condition, one of which is this pretty open category considered something like spirituality. And so the official position is, let's look at how we can not simply live for material wealth and gain, but how we can, if you like, reconfigure our successes with a focus on these notions of the heart mind, Confucian principles, and the notion of the entire culture realizing itself by connecting to the ancient traditions that come from Confucius. Elaine?
Yeah, I think Marcus already put it very well. I just want to give an example of the ancient Silk Road and how it parallels to the Belt and Road Initiative, and now building a community of shared future for mankind. Actually, these ideas all stem from the Confucian school of thought, where heaven, earth, and all beings are as one unity. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, when China was prosperous and powerful enough to literally defeat or to defeat another country, but it didn't choose to do so. It actually went on a trip of gifting other countries. So that was the Silk Road, and currently. Also, we're promoting this, our country is promoting this idea of Belt and Road of common prosperity. I think some people may question the intent, but I think to me, as a non-political but Chinese philosophy scholar, at least I'm happy to see this progress that our country has been made. Because quite frankly speaking, the reason why I make the the goldfish metaphor in the beginning is it's actually very important. It's how easily we forget history. For example, China has only rose from the ashes like less than 100 years ago. Like 100 years from now, 24 or something, we were in war and in desperate poverty. And China just recovered from that in the past few decades. So now, like Marcus said, it began to pay more attention to the spiritual well-being of the people. So it's a process that we see people go back to I think the better ideas that are represented in Chinese philosophy. Marcus.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Duncan McFarland, you're welcome to comment, Duncan.
Yeah, I was just going to comment in terms of integrating the past culture with the present. When I was in China in 2017, Shanghai and other places, there was a core socialist values campaign with posters, billboards all over the public, videos on the subways and so forth, which presented about a dozen of what were called core socialist values, several of which were essentially the same as traditional Confucian values as mentioned here, such as for peace. And these posters combined a sort of socialist graphic presentation with traditional Chinese styles of artwork. So I thought this was a very interesting way of trying to bring in some of the very traditional ancient Confucian values of peace and Taoist values to the current socialist culture. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I made the point when we started, and Elaine has reinforced this a little bit, that this is a culture that's very different to ours, that the reservations that we in the West, but particularly the United States, have about the government, the nanny state and so on, is something that is very foreign to people who live in a traditional culture where there's a sort of collectivist focus of care for each other. And so these kinds of things that Duncan is illustrating of a shared notion of socialist progress just seems to connect in a quite unusual and organic way with the history of China and with the current government and with this sort of deep philosophical tradition. It's fascinating to think about, and it does involve some serious reorientating of one's thinking. Elaine?
Oh, Marcus, I just want to mention that Mr. Duncan, I think he made a great example here. The socialist values were, I believe they were designed especially to bring the best of the traditional values to the current days and to help these values still make sense in Chinese culture right now. I just think of another interesting aspect of Chinese philosophy and how it relates to peace. Do you guys know how to write the word wu or war in Chinese? It's actually, it's funny how the word wu is written with the meaning to stop the war is the art of the war is to stop the war. So there are a million examples I can give you like this. A Chinese philosophy, their thoughts, throughout thousands of years have been embedded in the blood veins, in every word we write. So honestly, it doesn't matter which king or which government rules the country, is the culture that wins. So that's why I assert that, as a philosophy scholar, we're really happy to see, because that is the secret why China has been this only continuous state for over thousands of years. Like, for example, people say ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, but ancient China and modern China is essentially one China. Maybe in the future the government will still change, but eventually it is the culture, it is the philosophy that will go back to rule people's heart mind. So, Marcus, yeah.
Well, the pursuit of peace will have the objective of realizing that kind of continuity, and it seems, particularly going back to the Belt and Road notion, I was also thinking of comparing the idea of a kind of equal trade relations In other words, imagine, I mean, it's from a very young age, the images of camels traipsing over the Gobi Desert all the way across vast parts of Central Asia to exchange things and bring them back, to exchange culture, to exchange products, material products and goods, and then not to fight people, not to conquer them, not to kill them. There was that experience from the people to the north. The Mongols had a very different approach, and so the Belt and Road is a very significant metaphor in terms of the pursuit of peace. It's very, very actively mischaracterized in the West, I'm afraid, and intentionally mischaracterized without an appreciation of the objective of peace that informs and deeply informs this long historical view that Elaine's talking about. I see Elizabeth. Please, Elizabeth, happy to hear from you.
Elizabeth and Quanta both have questions.
Yeah.
Unmute. You muted again.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wrote in the chat, is capitalism the problem? And actually, it's a combination of Chinese philosophy and you can say Marxism, in the sense that you have to talk about greed while you're talking about social class. And it seemed to me that socialism tries to eliminate social class. Of course, then when you say afterwards, what do you have? And I think that from hearing the speaker, that it's a combination of socialism and Confucianism, or basic Chinese philosophy combination with socialist values. Would you say that is correct?
Elaine?
Thanks, thanks, Elizabeth. I think that this is how I see this. Socialism and capitalism, they are, I'm not expert on these terms, but these are modern terms. But Chinese philosophy has its own life and living for thousands of years. So anyone who could, so fundamentally, Chinese philosophy is about realizing the truth of life, where we are not individuals, but instead a greater self. So I believe whichever system or belief that, so we talk about the key to Chinese philosophy is how can we walk on the path of Tao. If a country follows the Tao, then the country shall last and prosper. If a person follows the Tao, it shall last and prosper. So I would say, instead of a question between socialism or capitalism, it's really about how a country or a person could gradually surpass the illusion or limitations of the little self and see the influence of their action reach beyond what they see on the surface. Marcus, I don't know if I make it clear, but
yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine, and thank you, Elizabeth. Does anybody else have any other comments while we're waiting? If anybody has none,
Quanta has raised her hand.
Okay.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you very much. I am of Eastern, religion. What I wanted to know is, what is the difference and similarities between the Western religions, I should say, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, versus the Eastern philosophy of Chinese philosophy? And what are similarities and differences? And is there also deity involved in the Chinese philosophy? Thank you.
I think Marcus could answer this question. Just from my point of view, actually, China is largely a non-religious country, and me myself is also a non-religious person. But I feel like I gain so much wisdom from reading philosophies of the world and also religions of the world. It's because the nature of Chinese philosophy is about the heart man. It's about the Xing. We see wisdom and philosophy of all humanity, a part of our inner treasures. So that's why, so Taoism and Confucianism, they sound like a school of religion, but they're actually not. It's just a way of life. Like, for example, Chinese philosophers, whether they're Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucianist, they all believe in like follow the nature, like don't fight against with the nature. And also I saw this interesting quote from the comment by my friend Mark Liu. He also studies and works in the US, but he's a Chinese young person. And I think his quote goes, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches the mice." This is actually a famous quote by Deng Xiaoping, the father of China's opening reform. I think that goes back to Elizabeth's question about socialism and capitalism. So as long as it doesn't hurt the core, we can use whatever cat at our disputes. So, Marcus.
Again, I want to emphasize this distinction between how we in the West think about our orientation to each other and to life, and then what's very different about what you just said, and that is the idea that China doesn't have a religion, right? There's not this ideology of religion, right? There's a way of life, and that way of seeing things is so profoundly different that it behooves us, I'm reluctant to say this, but behooves us to try and get our heads around this, that this is so thoroughly different. And that is a way that it is something that we need to not only pay attention to, but add to our knowledge foundation so that we can be advocates for peace, because advocates for peace, in a sense, understand that there's a way of life where peace is endemic to living, as opposed to somewhat more ritualistic through organized religion. I'm just speculating a little bit there, but I think it's profoundly important as an example of the contrasts and why perhaps it's so difficult to have peace in the front of our consciousness. Because we have institutional structures that have created that tendency in the West towards violence as opposed to reflection and peace. Elaine?
Yeah, I think Marcus had just put it so well. It just reminds me another phrase in Confucianism thought, 和而不同, which literally means harmonious, even when there exists different opinions, and unity. Diversity. This is, I think, ultimately what Chinese philosophy strives for. And I think it's done a great job. Just see how few religious wars are there in Chinese history. There were literally like no religious wars because, a Buddhist will respect a Taoist and a Taoist will love a Confucian person. It doesn't, we think it's ridiculous that just because you think different than I do, that I'm going to kill you or diminish you on this planet. It's because we are this one being. Again, it's like how it's like if we hurt our left hand with our right hand, it just doesn't make sense to Chinese people in general. So, yeah, Marcus.
Well, I think that's a very important, pertinent point for us to pay attention to, as well as the other pertinent points you've made here. And I want to say, I think our time is up. So I want to say, unless there's anybody with a pressing question or comment, I want to say thank you very much, Elaine, for your contribution. Oh, I see that there are 2 participants who've raised their hands. So let's go and see. I can't see those on the screen, I'm afraid. So please, whoever has raised their hand, feel free to talk. I can't see you.
Remember me again.
Hold off, Jeff. It's William Root and Corinne Benson.
I'll wait.
Thanks. Thank you. William?
You're muted, William Root, you there? Maybe William has stepped away from his computer. Let's go to Corinne Benson.
Yes, I feel like there's some dangers in romanticizing the past, and it can bring potentials for violence as well. Because I don't think under Confucianism, I've never felt that the status of women was great. To me, the theme was if everyone did their duty, then there would be peace and harmony. But it did put women at the mercy of men in terms of men doing their duty toward them. I feel one of the great advances of the modern era is what they have done in China for women. And that needs a great deal of credit, because I think there's potential for violence in not giving women good status. And it is the future that will result in greater harmony if we raise the status of women. I also feel that there are lessons from the past that must be looked at. And one is that there's still, although one of the big sources of violence in Western culture has been monotheism, whereas in the East there was more of a dual appreciation of different gods and their existence. Yet there was conflict between the secular and the religious in times past. I have seen some examples in archaeology and things between the Buddhist sector and the secular. So there is we cannot whitewash some of the violence that did occur, and we must learn from it. I think too, I think we're downplaying some of the class conflict issues that are significant in the world.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. On the status of women, let's celebrate the fact that Elaine is our presenter. Elaine's mother, Madam Ping, is a wonderful leader of a group associated with whom Elaine and her mother and others are associated with. I've seen the institution and the development of the knowledge around this field over a number of years. A significant percentage of the leadership positions and teaching positions are held by women. And it's quite wonderful to behold and to be in the presence of the very humble and yet extremely knowledgeable women who are leading this teaching and knowledge acquisition program. And certainly we're not interested in whitewashing. We want to know the truth, and we also want to advance the cause of peace. And of course that will be advanced, and that will happen by pursuing the truth.
Absolutely, Marcus, and thank you for the lady. I don't know your name, but I think it's a great notion that you made on the rights of women. As a woman myself, I think one inspiring idea I found from ancient classical Chinese philosophy is that we don't just see male and female, but the energy of yin and yang. So ultimately, if a person cultivate oneself to the ultimate goodness state, this person should be balanced with the energy of yin and yang, irregardless of his original gender, so that this person transcends, once again, the little self, transcends their limitations and become this wonderful state of being. I'm only on the road. It's only been 10 years for me into this study, and I think it definitely takes generations of effort to recover the true meaning in the classics, and I'm sure there are certain aspects in history that we should go beyond. But just to me, personally, I feel that I found more wisdom from learning and reading such classics, and that helped me become a better person in current times. So, Marcus, yeah.
Thank you. Another question?
I think that's it. Jeffrey already had one, and William Root isn't responding, so I think we're...
All right, well, I think we can say thank you to everybody for your questions, your comments, and for your observations, and for attentive listening. And certainly thank you to Elaine. A wonderful presentation, and rich in ideas and rich in the promotion of our core objective, which is to understand the cause of peace and to pursue peace. So Elaine, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here, for registering. There will be this has been recorded, and we will make it available so that others, people who weren't able to be here, can share it and make use of it. And I want to also thank Cole and Massachusetts Peace Action for facilitating this as part of our program or their program and our program as members of the public in our efforts to pursue peace. So thanks again. And with that, I'll bid you good night in peace.
Before you leave, Elena and Marcus, I shared with you my email. So any of my questions that have been answered, they're a little few that you can email the answers to me. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very
and thank you
much,
again.
you all.